The texture of the golden nursery walls felt cold against Empress Solari's palms as her daughter's cries echoed through the chamber. Kestri was a tangle of golden frustration. The 3-year-old's tail had knotted itself around the crib's structural leg, an involuntary lock that no attendant dared pry loose. For 40 minutes, the air had thrummed with high-pitched misery. This sound bypassed political strategy and went straight to the Empress's maternal core. Beneath the formal table where advisors argued about trade routes, Solari's own tail was coiled tight around her wrist. Her scales darkened into a bruised purple as she fought to remain composed. A small clay pot sat on the nearby music room windowsill, holding a dormant sun seed that had refused to sprout for a decade. The palace was a fortress of silence until it wasn't. Then the sound changed. It wasn't palace music. Femi Adeyemi, just a compact man of 27 with hands stained by leather dye, sat in the adjacent service room. He was a simple shoe cobbler, hired to fix ceremonial boots. He did not know the ventilation shaft carried his voice directly into the royal nursery. Have you ever had a moment where your most private habit changed the fate of a world? Femi was working on a stubborn clasp, his brow furrowed in concentration. He began to hum, a low vibration that felt like a physical weight in the small music room. Then, without thinking, he slipped into the lyrics of a lullaby his grandmother had once sung in Lagos. The Yoruba words were soft and rhythmic. Among the Astari, tail rapping is an involuntary bonding response triggered by deep emotional resonance. Usually it is reserved for life mates. He was 2 verses into a Yoruba lullaby before he realized he was performing for alien royalty through a ventilation shaft. Femi just thought the palace walls were thick. A shoe cobbler had no business singing within earshot of an empress's child. But he was already in the second verse. In the nursery, the transformation was instantaneous. Kestri's wailing died into a soft, questioning gurgle. Her tail, previously locked in a grip of iron, uncurled slowly to search the air. It reached toward the ventilation grate, the golden tip vibrating in time with Femi's voice. Suddenly, the bonding alarms triggered. High-pitched chimes signaled a primary soul declaration on the most binding spiritual event in the empire. In the music room, the tiny sunseed in the clay pot gave a sharp, audible crack. A microscopic sliver of green pushed through the dry soil, responding to frequencies it hadn't felt in an age. The door to Femi's workshop burst open, revealing 6 armored guards and a protocol officer whose face had gone a very pale shade of gold. Femi froze, the needle still poised over a boot. The music room went silent, not empty, the silence of 14 nursery staff choosing not to breathe. The boot sat on Femi's lap, half-stitched. Through the ventilation grate, a small gold tail reached toward him, curling and uncurling. He hadn't stopped humming. Something ancient just woke up in that palace, and Femi is holding the needle. The protocol officer's hands shook as he gestured toward the ventilation grate, his golden scales vibrating with a frantic energy. He spoke of ancient laws carved into the very hull of their first starships, laws regarding the sanctity of the first song. To the Astari, singing to a child in the resonance chamber wasn't merely a performance. It was a soul intimacy declaration of the highest order. The tail bond Kestri had initiated was a permanent familial anchoring, a spiritual lock that outlasted blood, treaties, and even the throne itself. Femi clutched his repair needle like a tiny, useless shield, his mind spinning through the implications of a culture he barely understood. He was just a man who liked the way his grandmother's songs filled up the empty spaces in a room. The officer leaned in, his vertical pupils dilated with terror. The council has already been notified. The Imperial Fleet is making transit. You have established a resonance of parentage that cannot be undone by any mortal hands. Femi's eyes went wide as he looked at the guards. Right, how that means married? Worse, the officer replied, his voice a hushed rasp. Marriage is a contract of the law. This is a weaving of the spirit. Empress Solari stepped into the room then, her presence heavy and smelling of ozone and sun-warmed gold. She was a vision of gold-patterned skin and copper-red hair that moved with a life of its own, though it settled flat against her shoulders as she looked at him. Her amber eyes were intense, searching his face for a malice that simply wasn't there. A starry tail wrapping is an involuntary bonding response. The tail wraps around anyone the Astari feels drawn to. Usually an empress is never touched by anyone beneath her rank, but here was her heir, physically anchored to a man with thread under his fingernails and leather dye on his skin. Solari stopped correcting herself when she thought his name. On galactic law had no precedent for a cobbler becoming soul-kin to an empress via lullaby. 3 legal scholars were dispatched. They arrived arguing. The chaos did not end, but it settled into a strange, quiet rhythm that the palace eventually came to accept. Femi's workshop was relocated to the nursery wing, not by request, but by an imperial decree that saw his tools moved before he could even pack them. Every night at precisely 2100 hours, the cobbler put down his leather shears and sat by the golden grate. He sang of the sun and the red earth, of a home he might never see again. Kestri would sit by his feet, her small golden tail wrapped firmly around his ankle, as if afraid he might float away into the ventilation ducts. Solari would stand in the doorway, her presence a silent shadow, her armor replaced by flowing silks. She watched him with those intense amber eyes, her own tail uncurling a fraction more each night. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was already done. The music room windowsill was no longer home to a dormant secret. The sun seed had transformed into a vibrant, gold-leaf plant that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. It grew an inch taller with every verse he finished, its leaves vibrating in perfect harmony with his voice. Beneath the warm glow of the nursery lamps, the gold-leaf plant cast a long, steady shadow across the floor. The seed of a new family has officially taken root. Now, do you think a song can be more powerful than a fleet of warships? Let me know if you want to hear more stories from the Resonance Chamber.